She thought her life was safe, until a gunshot tore through the gallery, exposing her fiancé as a traitor. In the chaos, he appeared, a man of shadows, danger, and obsession. He didn't just save her, he claimed her. And from that moment, Violet's world would never be hers again. Before we dive into today's story, tell me, where are you watching from? The gallery smelled of polished wood, aged leather, and the faint trace of expensive perfume. Violet moved among the crowds, her fingers brushing the sleek surfaces of display cases, her eyes tracing the intricate brushstrokes of centuries-old paintings. Everything felt muted, almost unreal. She wore a silk dress the color of storm clouds, soft against her skin, but her heart thumped in a rhythm that no fashion could disguise. Julian's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, guiding her with a casual confidence that had always comforted her, or so she thought. The room glittered with light, chandeliers dripping crystals like frozen tears, reflecting in the eyes of wealthy patrons who whispered deals and compliments over flutes of champagne. Violet tried to smile politely, nodding at acquaintances, but her mind lingered on the subtle tension she sensed between Julian and certain guests. She thought it was nothing, an undercurrent of competitiveness. She thought she was imagining the glances that lingered too long, the small, careful gestures that seemed rehearsed. Then the first shot rang out. It was a sharp, unnatural crack that split the hum of polite conversation. Glass trembled, and a chandelier shivered as if afraid. Violet froze, her breath caught in her throat, her chest tight. Julian tensed beside her, his jaw hardening. The crowd erupted into screams, the polished floors suddenly slick with spilled champagne and scattered hors d'oeuvres. She saw him, Julian, her fiancé, the man she had trusted, was not what he seemed. His hand slipped into the folds of his suit, and a cold, merciless smile curved his lips. The realization struck her like ice. He was the traitor, the one who had sold her family's secrets, who had put everything they held dear on the line for money, for power, for something she couldn't yet name. Panic surged, a raw, molten force burning through her veins. Gunfire cracked again, closer this time, and the room became chaos incarnate. Patrons ducked behind sculptures and under tables, shrieks echoing off marble walls. Violet felt herself being shoved backward, the air thick with smoke and fear. She tried to move, but her legs refused to obey. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but her body was frozen, a statue trapped in horror. A shadow fell over her, sudden and immense. Ren. The name had no meaning yet, but the presence was undeniable. He emerged from the chaos like a predator from the darkness, his gaze sweeping the room with lethal precision. The world seemed to bend around him. He was dressed in black, tailored to perfection, every movement smooth, controlled, commanding. Violet's breath caught. He wasn't just a man, he was a storm contained within human form. He reached for her, his hand gripping her wrist, firm and possessive. There was no hesitation, no questioning. His touch sent a jolt through her, a mixture of fear and something deeper, something primal that made her skin prickle. "This way," he commanded, his voice low, dark, and impossibly certain. Violet barely heard him over the screams, but she obeyed, drawn into the shelter of his shadow. Bullets tore through the air around them, pinging off metal and shattering glass with a sound that made her stomach drop. Ren shielded her, his arm wrapping around her like a fortress. She could feel his heartbeat against her shoulder, steady and unyielding. Every nerve in her body screamed danger, yet somewhere deep inside, a flicker of relief blossomed. He was here. He had chosen her. They moved through the chaos, his eyes scanning the room, every gesture measured and precise. He ducked behind a marble pillar, pulling Violet with him, and she realized with a mixture of fear and fascination that he was not just protecting her. He was commanding the storm around them, controlling it, bending it to his will. Violet's mind raced. How did he know exactly where the bullets would fly? How did he move so fluidly, as though he had rehearsed this dance of death 1,000 times? She wanted to speak, to ask, to understand, but words lodged in her throat. She felt the weight of his presence, suffocating yet thrilling. Every touch of his hand, Every brush of his coat against hers was a statement. You belong to me now. The crowd around them began to thin, people scrambling toward exits, some trapped, some fallen. Violet stumbled over a shattered display, and Wren's hand shot out, catching her elbow with a grip that was firm, unyielding, yet shockingly gentle. Stay close, he whispered, the edge in his voice softening only slightly. They turned a corner into a dimly lit corridor, the sounds of chaos muffled but still audible. A living nightmare pressing in from every side. Violet's heart pounded violently, and her palms were slick with sweat. Her body, so used to order and quiet, was now thrust into violence and unpredictability, and she felt herself teetering on the edge of collapse. Wren's gaze fell on her, sharp and assessing. Look at me, he said. His command was not a request. Violet met his eyes reluctantly, and in that instant she understood something terrifying and intoxicating. He saw her, not the fragile archivist she thought herself to be, not the scared woman hiding behind polite smiles. He saw everything. A scream echoed from the gallery behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Violet flinched. Wren tightened his grip on her wrist, pulling her closer, his body shielding hers. The heat from his chest pressed against her back, and a violent, dizzying awareness stirred inside her. Fear and desire collided, sharp and inescapable. She had never felt anything like this, and part of her hated herself for the thrill that raced through her veins. They moved silently, every step calculated, every breath synchronized with the tension in the air. Violet felt the raw power emanating from him. Control, danger, authority. And she realized she had never wanted to be protected by someone so much. But she also realized, with a pang of dread, that this protection came at a price she didn't yet understand. Her gaze flicked back toward the shattered gallery, toward Julian, and something cold and undeniable settled in her chest. He had betrayed her, but this man, this enigma, was offering her salvation, and she had no idea what she was stepping into. Every instinct screamed to run, yet she was rooted to Wren's side, captivated and terrified in equal measure. The hallways twisted, corridors narrowing, until they reached a service exit. Wren pushed the door open with one fluid motion, scanning the street outside. Violet blinked, adjusting to the harsh night light. Cars were overturned, a few bystanders had fled, and the echo of sirens began to grow distant. Wren pulled her inside a shadowed alley, pressing her against the brick wall, his hands lingering on her arms. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held her in a grip tighter than steel. Violet swallowed hard, feeling the adrenaline and confusion mingling in a chaotic swirl. He bent slightly, his lips brushing a hair from her face, a touch fleeting but electric. "You're safe, for now," he murmured. The words were a promise and a warning. Violet's chest tightened, and she realized with a jolt that her life had changed in an instant. Nothing would ever be the same. She wanted to run, to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was meet his gaze, captivated by the darkness and power swirling in him. Julian's betrayal, the blood, the chaos, it all became a blur against the sharp clarity of Wren's presence. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, and he was the storm waiting to sweep her away. Fear and longing twisted together, and for the first time she didn't resist. Every instinct screamed that she should flee, that this world was too dangerous, too violent for someone like her. Yet every fiber of her being knew she was already lost, to him, to the night, to the storm that had chosen her. And in that moment, Violet understood something terrible and exquisite. She could never go back. Julian, wounded but alive, appears at the far end of the alley. His gaze locks onto Violet and Wren, filled with venom and malice. With a low, raspy whisper, he says, "This isn't over," before melting into the shadows, leaving them both tense, alert, and unsure what danger still lurks in the night. Violet blinked against the bright morning light, her head pounding, the events of the previous night a chaotic storm in her mind. The familiar scent of her apartment was gone, replaced with the faint tang of leather, polished wood, and something sharper, power. She tried to sit up, but the softness beneath her pulled her back. The bed was enormous, silk sheets cool against her skin, and the walls stretched high, adorned with modern art that seemed to pulse under the morning sun. She was in a place both beautiful and alien, her heart still thundering as if it hadn't fully caught up with her body. Ren sat across the room, his posture relaxed yet impossibly precise, eyes tracing her movements like a predator studying prey. He was dressed simply, dark trousers and a fitted black shirt, but the way he carried himself made him impossible to ignore. Every line of his body was tension and control. The calm at the center of a storm, Violet barely survived. Where am I? Her voice was small, unsure, fragile. Home, he said simply, the word heavy with meaning. But it wasn't comfort that laced his tone. It was ownership. Violet shivered at the weight behind it. She tried to sit fully, but panic flared. Why am I here? Her hands trembled as she clutched the sheets. I don't understand. Ren rose smoothly, walking toward her, his presence filling the room with a heat that made her skin prickle. You've been dragged into a world you don't yet comprehend, and I'm the one keeping you alive. His gaze swept over her, dark and assessing, as though measuring her for some invisible scale. Violet felt exposed under it, naked not in body, but in soul. What do you want from me? Her whisper cracked, fragile and trembling. He stopped in front of the bed, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His hand hovered near her shoulder, but didn't touch her yet. I want you to survive. And to survive, you stay here, with me. That's the price. The words were simple, matter of fact, yet each syllable dripped with danger. There was no negotiation, no room for argument. This was the law in his world, and she was already bound by it. Violet's stomach knotted. So, I'm trapped? Trapped implies choice, he corrected, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. You have a choice. Accept my protection, and you live. Refuse, and... His eyes darkened, the threat unsaid but clear. She swallowed hard, realizing there was no real alternative. Her world, once quiet and predictable, had collapsed, and she now stood at the edge of something terrifying and unknown. Ren circled her slowly, every step deliberate, like a hunter savoring the scent of something wild. Violet noticed the strength in his hands, the way his shoulders tensed with controlled energy. There was something almost hypnotic in the way he moved, dangerous yet beautiful, and a strange pulse of fear and attraction surged through her. She tried to look away, tried to tell herself it was wrong to feel anything but fear, but she couldn't. His presence was overwhelming, and part of her, against every instinct, wanted it. You think this is about charm or luck, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate through the floorboards. It isn't. It's about survival. And right now, you're alive because of me. That will never change. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks, anger, shame, and something else she didn't understand all swirling inside her. He wasn't just protective, he was obsessive. Every glance, every measured step, every word pressed against her like a promise and a warning all at once. I don't know if I can, she whispered, her hands tightening around the sheets. I don't know if I can stay in your world. Ren knelt beside the bed, close enough that she could feel his breath on her face. His fingers brushed a loose strand of hair from her temple, gentle in contrast to the hard edge behind his eyes. You will learn, he said softly, yet the underlying command made it impossible to ignore. You will learn to survive, you will learn your strength, and if you are clever, you will learn to want it. The words sent shivers through her. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but her body refused to comply. She felt drawn to him, pulled into a gravity she could neither name nor resist. He was danger in human form, and she wanted to touch it, to understand it, even as every rational thought screamed for caution. The penthouse was a fortress in disguise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Detroit, the city sprawling below like a sea of steel and lights. Violet noted the security systems, the subtle hints of reinforced doors and private corridors. Every detail whispered that this was not merely a home, it was a citadel, built for control and protection, built for power. And she, somehow, was at its center. Ren stood, moving toward the large windows, arms crossed. He looked out at the city as if he ruled it, a dark god surveying his domain. Violet's eyes followed him, taking in the power and danger radiating from every inch of him. She wanted to run, and yet she couldn't. Every instinct, every fiber of her being screamed that to leave would be to throw herself back into the chaos she had barely survived. Hours passed, though she had no sense of time. Ren spoke little, each word chosen with precision, each gesture weighted with meaning. He didn't push her for answers. He didn't demand explanations. He simply existed in the same space, a constant magnetic force. Violet realized that part of his power was this calm, unyielding presence, the way he could dominate without raising a hand, the way he could terrify and allure in the same heartbeat. Eventually, she found herself moving through the penthouse under his guidance, learning the layout, noting the hidden panels, the secured exits, the places he had chosen for moments of refuge. Each detail reminded her that survival in his world demanded awareness, demanded surrender to rules she hadn't yet set. And somewhere in that awareness, a dark thrill ran through her. She was terrified, but she was also alive, and alive in ways she had never known. Ren watched her as she moved, his gaze softening for the briefest moment before hardening again. Violet caught herself thinking about the contradictions in him. Tender and brutal, protective and obsessive, human and impossibly untouchable. She didn't understand him, not yet, and she suspected she never would. But the pulse of desire mixed with fear was relentless, a tide that refused to recede. He finally approached her again, stepping close enough that the heat from his body pressed against hers. His voice was low, almost intimate. "You will sleep here tonight," he said, voice a whisper and a command all at once. "And you will stay close. No wandering, no distractions. Your life depends on it." Violet's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to protest, but no words came. The air between them was charged, electric, suffocating in its intensity. She felt both terrified and drawn in, aware that she had already crossed a threshold she could never retreat from. The day faded into night, shadows pooling in the corners of the penthouse. Violet sat by the massive windows, looking out over the city, trying to reconcile the fear and fascination swirling within her. Ren remained nearby, silent but present, his eyes constantly flicking toward her. Every glance, every shift of posture reminded her that he was watching, always watching, and that she had become part of his world whether she wanted to or not. Then, a subtle noise, too faint to register at first, a shadow moving where it shouldn't, made her pulse spike. Ren's body tensed instantly. He moved before she could react, pulling her back into the shadows of the room, pressed close to him, his hands firm on her arms. "Never look at him again," he whispered, voice dark, sharp, final. Violet's breath caught. The air was suddenly charged with danger, immediate and visceral. Something had breached their sanctuary, and Ren was every bit the predator she had glimpsed the night before. A masked hitman had infiltrated the estate, his presence silent and deadly. Ren's dark eyes scanned the room, calculating, protective, and merciless. Violet pressed against him, heart racing as he murmured in her ear, "Never look at him again." Just as the intruder stepped closer, every shadow stretching toward them like the teeth of a trap. Violet's chest heaved as she pressed herself against the shadows, the sudden presence of the masked intruder still echoing in her nerves. Ren's hands gripped her arms with firm, unwavering strength, holding her close as he scanned the room with eyes sharper than any weapon. The air smelled of leather, smoke, and something darker. Control. Violet's pulse raced, her mind barely keeping pace with the speed of his movements. She felt small, fragile, and yet she knew, somehow, that nothing in this room could touch them while he was here. The intruder moved silently, a predator testing the waters, and Ren's body was a living barricade between Violet and danger. His every motion was fluid, precise, and deadly, each step a calculated measure of threat and protection. Violet's stomach churned with adrenaline, and a part of her, shameful, unwelcome, felt a thrill she could not name. She was terrified, yes, but there was also a raw magnetism in the way N moved, a power that made her ache with a confusing mix of fear and desire. With one fluid motion, he drew the man's attention, stepping into the open just enough to reveal a shadow of lethal intent. The intruder froze, assessing, calculating, but Ren did not flinch. The tension in the room was tangible, a current that made Violet's skin prickle. She wanted to look away, to hide, but something in her refused. She needed to see him, needed to understand the storm she had been swept into. The man moved, slow, deliberate, testing Ren's patience. Violet's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to intervene, to speak, to help, but her hands trembled, and her voice was lost in the chaos of fear and fascination. Ren's eyes flicked to hers, dark and commanding, and a shiver ran down her spine. The unspoken message was clear. Do not move. Trust me. Survive. Ren's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, and in that instant, Violet realized something terrifying and undeniable. He did not just protect her because it was his duty. His obsession was personal, intimate, and possessive. Every glance, every subtle movement toward her, every taut line of muscle seemed to declare ownership without words. Her stomach knotted, and her pulse drummed a chaotic rhythm she could barely follow. The intruder made the mistake of lunging. Ren reacted with a fluid grace that made her dizzy to watch, a blur of motion, a shadow striking down an invisible enemy. His hands moved with lethal precision, disarming, restraining, controlling. Violet's eyes widened, her chest tightening as the violence unfolded around her. She had never witnessed anything like this, and part of her mind screamed in horror while another part, the darkest part, watched in awe, captivated by the raw power and absolute control he commanded. After a tense moment, the intruder was subdued, pressed into submission without a single unnecessary movement. Ren's chest heaved slightly, but his composure returned almost immediately. He turned to Violet, his eyes dark with something that was not fear, not anger, but a hunger she did not yet understand. You see, he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, this is the world you've been thrown into. You will learn to navigate it, or you will not survive. His hand lingered near her cheek, his touch impossibly light yet commanding, igniting a heat in her she could not deny. Violet's breath caught, her thoughts tangled between fear and an unfamiliar desire. She tried to speak, tried to form words, but the sound caught in her throat. Ren's gaze pinned her, an invisible chain binding her attention, and she felt herself leaning into it, compelled by a force she did not fully understand. You must trust me, he said, low and intimate, the sound brushing against her consciousness like a warning and a promise rolled into one. Violet swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his eyes, and in that moment, she realized just how suffocating his protection could be. Every movement he made, every glance, every subtle shift in posture reminded her that he was always in control. The realization sparked a mixture of frustration and fascination. She wanted independence, yet the pull toward him was magnetic, impossible to resist. Ren led her into a large training room adjacent to the penthouse, sparsely furnished but purposeful. The floor was polished wood, and the walls held an array of weapons, mirrors, and faint scuff marks from past practice. Violet's stomach fluttered with nervous energy, and a part of her rebelled. Why do I need this? She asked, voice wavering. I'm not like you. You will learn, he said, a dark edge creeping into his voice. You will learn to defend yourself, to anticipate, to survive. He moved behind her, his presence pressing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, the taut power coiled in every muscle. And you will learn that you are stronger than you think. The first exercises were simple: a focus on awareness, how to perceive danger, how to move through space without being seen. Violet stumbled, frustrated by the complexity of it, her muscles straining against unfamiliar motions. Wren's hands corrected her form, firm and unyielding, lingering a fraction too long at elbows, shoulders, wrists. Each touch was instructional, yet there was an undeniable intimacy in the closeness, a tension that made her pulse spike and her thoughts scatter. "You are tense," he observed quietly. "Relax, or you will make mistakes." His lips were close to her ear, his breath warm, and Violet's body reacted against her will. Every instinct screamed danger, and yet she shivered with a thrill she could not name. Hours passed in the repetition of drills, the pounding of her pulse, the awareness of Wren's constant presence. She was exhausted, frustrated, exhilarated, and terrified all at once. Every correction, every subtle touch, every glance carried layers of meaning she could not fully unravel. She wanted to resist him, to assert her independence, but the magnetic intensity of his gaze, the dark fire in his eyes, made resistance almost impossible. By the end of the session, sweat clinging to her hair and skin, Violet collapsed against a padded wall, chest heaving. Wren crouched beside her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are learning faster than I expected," he said, voice low and intimate, almost teasing, though the edge beneath it hinted at danger. "But there is still much to understand, much to survive." Violet felt her stomach twist at his words. Every sentence, every gesture reminded her that this man did not merely protect her. He claimed her attention, her obedience, her very focus. The obsession in his movements, the possessiveness in his tone, the way his gaze lingered, made her ache in ways she did not want to acknowledge. She wanted to deny it, to push him away, but her body betrayed her, every nerve alive to his presence. Later, when the training was done, Violet moved through the penthouse searching for a moment of solitude. Her hands trembled as she opened drawers and boxes, needing control, needing some small piece of independence. That's when she found it. A small, folded note, tucked in a corner where she hadn't noticed before. Her pulse quickened as she unfolded it, the handwriting instantly familiar, a sharp contrast to the careful order of Wren's world. Her breath caught. Julian's hand, his words, his betrayal. The note was a reminder, a provocation, a threat wrapped in ink and paper. The blood in her veins turned cold, a mixture of fear, anger, and the realization that the chaos of her old life had not yet released its grip. She pressed the note to her chest, trembling, and for the first time, she realized that survival was no longer just about evading bullets or learning defense. Survival was about navigating the tangled web of obsession, desire, and betrayal that now defined every part of her existence. Violet's fingers shook as she read Julian's words, the ink burning into her mind. Her eyes darted to the shadows of the room, suddenly aware of every sound, every shift. The note's message was clear, sinister, and immediate. Julian knew where she was. And somewhere beyond the walls, danger was already closing in. Violet held the note in her trembling hands, the edges crumpled from the grip of her fingers. Julian's words were sharp, cruel, and precise, designed to rattle her sense of safety, and yet beneath the terror, beneath the familiar pulse of fear, there was something new awakening inside her. She was learning, slowly, the rhythms of danger. She could anticipate the smallest sounds, the subtle shifts in shadows, the faintest stirrings that signaled threat. Wren had begun to teach her not just how to survive, but how to see the storm before it hit. Her body moved almost instinctively now, stepping around furniture, glancing toward doorways, listening for the slightest creak. The penthouse had become both a sanctuary and a battlefield, each space layered with hidden meaning, each corridor a test of awareness. Violet's mind raced, analyzing, predicting, calculating, even as her heart hammered in her chest. She was no longer entirely helpless. Not yet a fighter, but not the frightened girl who had collapsed in his arms weeks before. Wren watched her silently, always a step behind or beside, never intrusive, but impossibly present. His eyes tracked her movements, sharp, measuring, filled with a hunger she couldn't name. She felt his gaze on her constantly, a tether she could not sever, a weight she did not entirely resist. He was teaching her more than physical skill. He was teaching her endurance, resilience, and the dangerous power of surrendering to his guidance while remaining herself. One evening, he approached her as she inspected a collection of weapons, her fingers brushing against the cold steel of knives and the polished weight of a small pistol. "You are ready," he said softly, the words low and deliberate. "Tonight, you will see the world in which you now reside, not through my eyes, but your own." Violet looked up at him, uncertainty flickering across her face. I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "I don't even know what I'm stepping into." Ren's lips curved in a faint, predatory smile. "You will. And when you do, you will understand why your survival depends on more than just skill. You will understand the power of presence, the weight of influence, and the danger of desire." His voice brushed against her ear, intimate and commanding, and Violet felt a shiver trace her spine. She swallowed hard, aware that she was already caught in a tension she could not name, pulled toward him even as the logic of fear screamed otherwise. He led her through the city streets in a sleek black car, tinted windows shielding them from the world outside. The streets glowed with the muted light of evening, reflections dancing across the car's polished surface. Violet's hands gripped the edge of her seat, her mind alive with questions, with caution, and with an undercurrent of something far more primal. They arrived at a private gala, a lavish event concealed behind a facade of elegance. The estate sprawled across manicured gardens, fountains gleaming under soft lights. Guests moved with a precision that suggested both sophistication and danger, dressed in silks and tailored suits, their smiles polished, their eyes sharp and calculating. Violet felt immediately out of place, but Ren's hand on her back was steady, grounding, protective, and somehow possessive. "You watch," he whispered. "You listen, you learn." His gaze swept the room like a hawk, assessing, predicting, controlling. Violet's pulse raced. Each figure she passed seemed to carry secrets, each smile a mask hiding knives beneath the surface. The air buzzed with tension, an invisible electricity that made her skin tingle and her senses flare. They moved through the crowd with a fluid grace, Ren's presence a shadow that shielded her. He introduced her to a select few, his tone courteous yet edged with an authority that made every man and woman take notice. Violet realized that this was not merely a gathering, it was a battlefield of influence, a deadly dance where a misplaced word, a hesitant step, could cost everything. As they reached the center of the main hall, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. Violet barely had time to react as gunfire shattered the elegant illusion, crystal chandeliers trembling, guests screaming and scattering. The crowd became chaos incarnate, and Violet's instincts kicked in. She ducked behind a column, heart hammering, body taut, but panic rose in her chest. Ren was instantly at her side, a wall of control and violence. His hand gripped hers, pulling her down, his body pressing against hers, protective and intimate all at once. She could feel the warmth, the raw energy of him, and it ignited a stab, range, dangerous awareness within her. Her breath caught, the terror and the proximity blending into a pulse of emotion she did not yet understand. A masked attacker surged from the chaos, moving toward them with lethal intent. Ren reacted without hesitation, his movements a blend of precision and power that left her both terrified and mesmerized. He deflected a blade with his forearm, twisting the man's wrist with strength she could hardly comprehend, and then in a blur disarmed him completely. Violet watched, heart thundering, as he moved like a storm, a predator in human form, deadly and enthralling. He turned, eyes locking onto hers, and in that moment, Violet realized that she was more than observer. She was caught in the gravity of him, drawn to the danger, the power, the heat. Fear and desire collided, sharp and immediate, and she could not tell where one ended and the other began. The attacker surged again, and Violet instinctively moved, her body responding to the drills Ren had taught her. She sidestepped, ducked, and managed to knock a briefcase aside just as Ren delivered a precise strike that incapacitated the man. Her chest heaved with adrenaline, her skin alive with the thrill of survival, and she realized she had changed. She was no longer merely running, she was participating. Ren's gaze lingered on her, dark and measuring, and Violet felt exposed beneath it, a shiver running through her spine. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, a touch intimate, deliberate, and terrifyingly charged. "You are learning," he murmured, voice low, intimate, "and soon you will understand the power of being present in this world." Violet's pulse raced, a confusing blend of relief, fear, and an undeniable attraction she could not ignore. His proximity, the protective energy, the intensity in his eyes, it all tugged at something buried deep within her. She tried to pull back, to remind herself of reason, of caution, but her body refused to obey. She was caught, completely, in the gravity of him. The chaos began to subside as security and Ren's men subdued the attackers. Guests whispered, shaken, the elegance of the night fractured by violence. Violet felt herself trembling, a mix of fear and exhilaration, and she realized that her heart beat not just for survival, but for him, for the way he moved, for the way he dominated the space, for the dangerous allure of his presence. They moved to a quiet corner, away from prying eyes. Ren's hand brushed against hers, lingering, firm, possessive. Violet's breath caught. The tension between them was almost unbearable, a living thing that pulsed in the space around them. She wanted to look away, to retreat, but the pull was magnetic, unstoppable. "You are changing," he said softly, almost a whisper, his eyes never leaving hers. "And so is your world. There is no turning back now." Violet swallowed, her chest tight. She had never been this close to someone so dangerous, so powerful, so intoxicating. Fear and fascination, desire and survival, blended into a dizzying cocktail that left her breathless. She realized, with a jolt, that she was drawn to him in ways she could neither predict nor resist. Her hands tightened around her clutch, her mind spinning. The gala, the chaos, the thrill. It had awakened something deep within her. She understood that the world she had entered was far more intricate, far more dangerous, and far more seductive than she could have imagined. And at the center of it all stood Ren, a dark force she could not escape, even if she wanted to. Violet's pulse raced as she realized the full weight of her emotions. Fear, attraction, and awe collided inside her. She was drawn to Ren in ways she could not control, even as she sensed danger pressing in from every direction, shadows closing around them, waiting to strike the moment she let her guard down. Violet held the note in her trembling hands, the edges crumpled from the grip of her fingers. Julian's words were sharp, cruel, and precise, designed to rattle her sense of safety, and yet beneath the terror, beneath the familiar pulse of fear, there was something new awakening inside her. She was learning, slowly, the rhythms of danger. She could anticipate the smallest sounds, the subtle shifts in shadows, the faintest stirrings that signaled threat. Ren had begun to teach her not just how to survive, but how to see the storm before it hit. Her body moved almost instinctively now, stepping around furniture, glancing toward doorways, listening for the slightest creak. The penthouse had become both a sanctuary and a battlefield, each space layered with hidden meaning, each corridor a test of awareness. Violet's mind raced, analyzing, predicting, calculating, even as her heart hammered in her chest. She was no longer entirely helpless, not yet a fighter, but not the frightened girl who had collapsed in his arms weeks before. Ren watched her silently, always a step behind or beside, never intrusive, but impossibly present. His eyes tracked her movements, sharp, measuring, filled with a hunger she couldn't name. She felt his gaze on her constantly, a tether she could not sever, a weight she did not entirely resist. He was teaching her more than physical skill. He was teaching her endurance, resilience, and the dangerous power of surrendering to his guidance while remaining herself. One evening, he approached her as she inspected a collection of weapons, her fingers brushing against the cold steel of knives and the polished weight of a small pistol. "You are ready," he said softly, the words low and deliberate. "Tonight, you will see the world in which you now reside, not through my eyes, but your own." Violet looked up at him, uncertainty flickering across her face. I I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "I don't even know what I'm stepping into." Wren's lips curved in a faint, predatory smile. "You will. And when you do, you will understand why your survival depends on more than just skill. You will understand the power of presence, the weight of influence, and the danger of desire." His voice brushed against her ear, intimate and commanding, and Violet felt a shiver trace her spine. She swallowed hard, aware that she was already caught in a tension she could not name, pulled toward him even as the logic of fear screamed otherwise. He led her through the city streets in a sleek black car, tinted windows shielding them from the world outside. The streets glowed with the muted light of evening, reflections dancing across the car's polished surface. Violet's hands gripped the edge of her seat, her mind alive with questions, with caution, and with an undercurrent of something far more primal. They arrived at a private gala, a lavish event concealed behind a facade of elegance. The estate sprawled across manicured gardens, fountains gleaming under soft lights. Guests moved with a precision that suggested both sophistication and danger, dressed in silks and tailored suits, their smiles polished, their eyes sharp and calculating. Violet felt immediately out of place, but Wren's hand on her back was steady, grounding, protective, and somehow possessive. "You watch," he whispered. "You listen. You learn." His gaze swept the room like a hawk, assessing, predicting, controlling. Violet's pulse raced. Each figure she passed seemed to carry secrets, each smile a mask hiding knives beneath the surface. The air buzzed with tension, an invisible electricity that made her skin tingle and her senses flare. They moved through the crowd with a fluid grace, Wren's presence a shadow that shielded her. He introduced her to a select few, his tone courteous, yet edged with an authority that made every man and woman take notice. Violet realized that this was not merely a gathering. It was a battlefield of influence, a deadly dance where a misplaced word, a hesitant step, could cost everything. As they reached the center of the main hall, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. Violet barely had time to react as gunfire shattered the elegant illusion. Crystal chandeliers trembling, guests screaming and scattering. The crowd became chaos incarnate, and Violet's instincts kicked in. She ducked behind a column, heart hammering, body taut, but panic rose in her chest. Wren was instantly at her side, a wall of control and violence. His hand gripped hers, pulling her down, his body pressing against hers, protective and intimate all at once. She could feel the warmth, the raw energy of him, and it ignited a strange, dangerous awareness within her. Her breath caught, the terror and the proximity blending into a pulse of emotion she did not yet understand. A masked attacker surged from the chaos, moving toward them with lethal intent. Wren reacted without hesitation, his movements a blend of precision and power that left her both terrified and mesmerized. He deflected a blade with his forearm, twisting the man's wrist with strength she could hardly comprehend, and then in a blur, disarmed him completely. Violet watched, heart thundering, as he moved like a storm, a predator in human form, deadly and enthralling. He turned, eyes locking onto hers, and in that moment, Violet realized that she was more than observer. She was caught in the gravity of him, drawn to the danger, the power, the heat. Fear and desire collided, sharp and immediate, and she could not tell where one ended and the other began. The attacker surged again, and Violet instinctively moved, her body responding to the drills Wren had taught her. She sidestepped, ducked, and managed to knock a briefcase aside just as Ren delivered a precise strike that incapacitated the man. Her chest heaved with adrenaline, her skin alive with the thrill of survival, and she realized she had changed. She was no longer merely running, she was participating. Ren's gaze lingered on her, dark and measuring, and Violet felt exposed beneath it, a shiver running through her spine. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, a touch, intimate, deliberate, and terrifyingly charged. "You are learning," he murmured, voice low, intimate, "and soon you will understand the power of being present in this world." Violet's pulse raced, a confusing blend of relief, fear, and an undeniable attraction she could not ignore. His proximity, the protective energy, the intensity in his eyes, it all tugged at something buried deep within her. She tried to pull back, to remind herself of reason, of caution, but her body refused to obey. She was caught, completely, in the gravity of him. The chaos began to subside as security and Ren's men subdued the attackers. Guests whispered, shaken, the elegance of the night fractured by violence. Violet felt herself trembling, a mix of fear and exhilaration, and she realized that her heart beat not just for survival, but for him, for the way he moved, for the way he dominated the space, for the dangerous allure of his presence. They moved to a quiet corner, away from prying eyes. Ren's hand brushed against hers, lingering, firm, possessive. Violet's breath caught. The tension between them was almost unbearable, a living thing that pulsed in the space around them. She wanted to look away, to retreat, but the pull was magnetic, unstoppable. "You are changing," he said softly, almost a whisper, his eyes never leaving hers. "And so is your world. There is no turning back now." Violet swallowed, her chest tight. She had never been this close to someone so dangerous, so powerful, so intoxicating. Fear and fascination, desire and survival, blended into a dizzying cocktail that left her breathless. She realized, with a jolt, that she was drawn to him in ways she could neither predict nor resist. Her hands tightened around her clutch, her mind spinning. The gala, the chaos, the thrill, it had awakened something deep within her. She understood that the world she had entered was far more intricate, far more dangerous, and far more seductive than she could have imagined. And at the center of it all stood Ren, a dark force she could not escape, even if she wanted to. Violet's pulse raced as she realized the full weight of her emotions. Fear, attraction, and awe collided inside her. She was drawn to Ren in ways she could not control, even as she sensed danger pressing in from every direction, shadows closing around them, waiting to strike the moment she let her guard down. Violet's chest still raced from the gala, her mind tangled in a storm of emotions she barely understood. Fear, desire, exhilaration, and something far darker churned within her. She had felt the pull of Ren, the magnetic force of his presence, and though she tried to distance herself, the realization was terrifyingly clear. She was already bound to him in ways she could not control. Shadows moved along the edges of her consciousness, subtle and foreboding, whispering that the world was not finished with her yet. The first sign came with a message slipped beneath the door. No name, no signature, just a few words that froze her blood. "I'm not done with you." Her fingers trembled as she held it, the paper thin, but the threat solid, deliberate. Julian. She knew immediately it was him. He had returned. Ren emerged from the shadows, his steps silent but heavy with presence. He noticed the note instantly, his eyes narrowing, dark pools of calculating fury. Violet instinctively tried to hide it, but he had already seen. "He's here," she whispered, fear and exasperation warring in her tone. Ren's jaw tightened, his body coiling like a spring ready to strike. "I know," he said quietly, and the softness in his voice was gone, replaced by the storm she had come to recognize as his resolve. "He won't touch you, not while I'm here." the possessiveness in his tone wrapped around her like iron, and though she felt suffocated, part of her could not deny the comfort in the certainty of his protection. The estate hummed with tension as Wren's men moved through corridors, checking every entrance, every shadow, every potential blind spot. Violet followed him, the penthouse that had once felt like a sanctuary, now turning into a cage of vigilance. The thrill of danger mingled with desire as Wren's presence pressed against her constantly, his hand brushing hers, a subtle claim she could not escape. Hours passed in anxious waiting, every sound amplified, every shadow suspect. Violet tried to focus on tasks, organizing papers, reviewing security feeds, but her mind kept returning to the night, to Wren's body pressed against hers, to the ferocity in his eyes that both terrified and captivated her. She had never encountered a man so impossibly controlled, yet so passionately alive. The first confrontation came without warning. Julian appeared in the shadows of the garden, his silhouette lit by the faint glow of security lights. Wren was immediately at his side, moving with a fluid precision that made Violet's stomach knot. She wanted to flee, to call out a warning, but Wren's hand was on her wrist, steadying, commanding. "Stay behind me," he whispered, low and dangerous. Julian's voice carried through the night, rough and filled with venom. "You can't hide her forever, Wren. She's mine, in every sense. You're just a shadow chasing a ghost." The words were meant to provoke, to wound, and for a fraction of a second, Violet glimpsed the raw human element behind Wren's inhuman composure. His jaw tightened, his eyes flaring with possessive fury, and she realized the man behind the monster was as vulnerable as he was formidable. Wren stepped forward, moving like a predator closing in on prey. His presence was overwhelming, every movement deliberate, controlled, a storm barely contained. Violet felt the heat radiating from him, the energy that made the air between them crackle. The sight of Julian, a threat to her, to everything Wren protected, ignited something primal in her chest. She realized she could no longer separate fear from fascination, desire from survival. The confrontation escalated with a ferocity that left Violet breathless. Julian lunged, reckless, desperate, and Wren's response was immediate, precise, and merciless. The struggle was violent, a blur of bodies, shadows, and motion. Violet's stomach twisted as she watched Wren disarm and subdue him with a controlled, terrifying grace. Every strike, every block, every movement was calculated, efficient, and impossibly intimate, as though each motion was also a claim of ownership, a declaration that he alone would protect her. After the chaos, Wren stood close, his chest heaving, dark eyes locking onto hers with a ferocity that made her shiver. "Do you understand now?" he asked, voice low, intimate, dangerous. "He won't touch you, not ever, not while I'm here." Violet's lips parted, a mixture of fear and something far more complicated tracing through her. The way he moved, the way he claimed the space between them, made her pulse race in ways she had never anticipated. As the night wore on, Violet began to see more of the man behind the crime lord, the protector behind the predator. In quiet moments, when his fury faded, she glimpsed the loneliness, the depth of isolation, the weight of a life hardened by betrayal and blood. She realized that Wren's obsession was not merely about control, it was about connection, about a fear of loss that had made him dangerous, and yet heartbreakingly human. Their moments together became charged with tension. Every accidental brush of skin, every glance, every word carried layers of unspoken desire. Violet felt herself pulled deeper into him, the need to resist clashing violently with the magnetic draw of his presence. She had survived bullets, threats, and betrayal, yet it was this intimate, suffocating obsession that unsettled her most profoundly. Wren taught her subtle defenses, lessons in anticipation, awareness, and the deadly grace required to navigate the world he ruled. Violet struggled, stumbled, and sometimes failed. But each time, Wren was there, correcting, guiding, asserting, always close, always personal. The proximity, the heat, the energy between them blurred the lines of instruction and intimacy, leaving her both frightened and exhilarated. One evening, as they trained in the dimly lit corridors of the estate, Violet realized she could anticipate Wren's movements, could almost predict the pattern of his strikes and corrections. The realization thrilled and terrified her. She was becoming part of his world, and part of him was becoming irrevocably a part of her. Their bodies moved in close proximity, a dance of danger and desire, the tension between protection and obsession igniting a fire that neither could deny. But the night was far from safe. Amid the training, a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration beneath her fingertips caught her attention. Violet's eyes widened as she traced the sensation to a small device hidden in the shadows near the main hallway. Her breath hitched. The words of the note, Julian's reappearance, and the deadly games of the night converged in a horrifying clarity. Her fingers shook as she realized the truth. Julian had planted something in the estate, something lethal, precise, and timed. Panic surged through her, but a cold, determined clarity settled over her mind. She had to act, to prevent disaster, to survive not just for herself, but for Wren, for the bond that had been forged in fire and blood. Before she could process her next move, Wren stepped into the hallway, unaware of the deadly threat beneath their feet. Violet's heart pounded, her voice caught in her throat, and she froze, torn between warning him and the paralyzing fear that she might fail. The seconds stretched impossibly long, each tick of the clock a drumbeat of impending catastrophe. Violet's hands hovered over the device, her pulse thunderous. The bomb Julian had planted in the estate was active, ticking silently beneath the polished floors. Wren stepped closer, completely unaware, and Violet realized with a shock that this might be the moment that changes everything, if she didn't act now. Violet froze, hands hovering over the small device, her pulse hammering in her ears. The polished floor beneath her seemed to vibrate with a menace she could feel in her bones. She looked up at Wren, completely unaware of the lethal threat beneath his feet, the air between them electric with tension. Her breath caught in her throat, a swirl of fear, adrenaline, and something deeper, something that made her ache. "Wren," she whispered, voice trembling, but the word barely left her lips when a deafening roar split the air. The explosion ripped through the estate, shaking the walls, sending shards of glass and wood flying in every direction. Fire roared, smoke filled the hallways, and the polished luxury of the penthouse was torn apart by chaos. Wren's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, and then the calm, controlled predator he always was snapped into lethal action. He grabbed Violet, pulling her into his chest, shielding her from the flying debris. His grip was possessive, commanding, and her body pressed against his felt both terrifying and electric. Heat radiated from him, and she realized in that instant that every moment with him, every brush of skin, carried a dangerous intimacy she could neither resist nor ignore. Violet clutched his arm, heart racing. She had trained with him, learned to anticipate danger, but nothing could prepare her for this raw, unfiltered violence. Flames licked the edges of the hall, smoke stinging her eyes, yet she felt a surge of resolve. She would not be a passive participant, not now. Wren's eyes scanned the chaos, calculating, assessing, predicting. "Move," he barked, and they sprinted through corridors filled with falling debris, the roar of the fire behind them growing louder, more insistent. Violet's legs burned, lungs gasped for air, yet she followed, moving in a rhythm that had become instinctual through his training. They reached a landing where the flames blocked the obvious exits. Violet's eyes darted, searching for alternatives, and Wren's hand pressed to her back, guiding, correcting, holding her steady, even as the inferno threatened to consume them. "Stay with me," he growled, voice low, intimate, a tether and a warning rolled into one. The fire forced them into narrow hallways, smoke curling around them like living shadows. Violet's lungs burned, but she kept moving, her mind sharp, adrenaline sharpening her senses. Every step was a calculated risk, every movement a test of survival and instinct. She was no longer merely running. She was surviving, fighting, alive in ways she had never known before. Ren's hands gripped her shoulders as they ducked beneath a collapsing beam. The heat from the flames pressed in on them, but so did his presence. Every instinct told her to fear, yet the magnetic pull between them surged, intoxicating, suffocating, impossible to resist. She wanted to pull away, to seek safety, but part of her craved the heat, the danger, the raw intimacy of being pressed against him in the storm. A group of masked attackers emerged from the smoke, moving with silent precision. Ren didn't hesitate. He was a storm unleashed, every motion lethal, a deadly ballet of strength and control. Violet watched, awestruck, as he dispatched them with ruthless efficiency, his body coiled, precise, impossible to ignore. But he didn't leave her behind. Violet's training had prepared her for small interventions, and she found herself stepping into the chaos, using what she had learned. A fallen beam became a weapon. A shard of broken metal became a tool of defense. Her movements were clumsy, unpolished, but effective, and she realized with a thrill that she could participate, that she could survive, and even fight alongside him. Ren glanced at her, eyes dark with both pride and possessive hunger. "Good," he breathed, and the single word sent shivers down her spine. The connection between them was electric, a shared heartbeat in the middle of chaos, blending fear, desire, and something that neither could name. They moved through smoke-choked corridors, bodies close, coordinated in unspoken rhythm. Violet's confidence grew, every dodge, every block, every leap strengthening her resolve. She was no longer just the protected. She was a participant, a force in the storm, alive in ways she had never imagined. Flames threatened the stairwell, forcing them to take a narrow service corridor. The fire roared behind them, a living, consuming beast, and Violet's mind was razor-sharp, every sense heightened. She could hear the faint footfalls of attackers, smell the smoke, feel the heat pressing in, all while maintaining the focus Ren had instilled in her. Ren's hand brushed hers repeatedly, a subtle tether, a constant claim. Violet felt the tension, the heat, the unspoken intimacy, and it stirred something dangerous and addictive inside her. Her pulse raced not just from fear, but from proximity, from the unrelenting intensity of his presence. They reached a service exit and pushed through, only to be confronted by more masked figures. Ren moved first, a blur of violence and precision, while Violet, heartbeat thrumming, stepped forward instinctively. She used a broken pipe to knock one off balance, another to push an attacker back. The surge of empowerment mixed with fear, exhilaration, and something darker, a recognition of her growing strength, her ability to survive beside him. Ren's dark eyes met hers amidst the chaos, and in that brief moment, she understood him even more. The man behind the monster was not invincible, not untouchable. He was a protector, yes, but also a man shaped by obsession, betrayal, and fire. The intimacy of the air connection was a lifeline, a shared pulse in the storm, tethering them both to survival and to one another. But the chaos was relentless. Smoke thickened, flames leapt unpredictably, and attackers pressed closer. Violet's instincts screamed, and she followed Ren's lead, moving as one with him, feeling every shift in his body, every breath, every heartbeat. She had become more than a student. She had become a partner in the storm. Then, as they rounded a corner, Violet felt a sudden, sharp grip on her arm. Masked hands seized her, dragging her backward into the smoke. She screamed, reaching for Ren, but his eyes, filled with disbelief and fury, could only follow. Her pulse raced, terror clawing through her chest. She struggled, kicking, twisting, but the assailants were relentless. The connection she had fought to build with him was torn away, and the terrifying realization struck her. She was being taken from him. Ren lunged, a roar of rage ripping from his chest, but the smoke and chaos swallowed her. Her fingers brushed his hand for a fleeting, desperate moment, and then she was gone, dragged into the shadows by the masked attackers. Ren's roar of fury echoed through the burning halls, but his steps came too late. Violet was gone, and the fire around them raged on, consuming walls, ceilings, and safety alike. Helplessness, anger, and a dangerous, unrelenting obsession burned in his dark eyes as he realized the stakes had escalated beyond anything he had anticipated. Violet vanished into the smoky night, captured by masked assailants. Ren stood amidst the flames, chest heaving, eyes dark with fury and desperation. The inferno around him was chaos, but the real fire, the fire in his obsession, in his need to claim and protect her, was yet to be unleashed. Violet's wrists burned where the rough rope bit into her skin. She had lost count of the hours, the shadows blurring into one another, the room cold and unwelcoming. The hideout smelled of damp concrete, sweat, and fear, a stark contrast to the luxury of Ren's estate. She pressed her back against he wall, heart hammering, mind spinning with questions she dared not voice aloud. Every muscle in her body ached from being bound, from tension, from the adrenaline that refused to fade. The faint hum of movement outside the door made her freeze. Every instinct screamed for her to be silent, to listen, to anticipate. She had learned much in the last weeks, the sharp rhythm of danger, the subtle shifts of shadow, but nothing could have prepared her for this raw, terrifying immediacy. Julian's betrayal had put her directly in the hands of enemies she barely understood, in a world that threatened to consume her entirely. Through the thin walls, voices murmured. She caught fragments of threats, deals, plans, the cold calculus of a mafia underworld that she had only glimpsed before. Every word painted a picture of danger, a war waged in whispers and gunfire. Violet's stomach turned with understanding. The world Ren inhabited was not merely powerful, it was brutal, relentless, and unforgiving. Time became a distorted concept measured only by the slow crawl of shadows across the floor. Violet's mind raced with possibilities. She could try to escape, but the layout was unknown, the guards vigilant, the exit uncertain. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She would not be helpless. She had learned to survive. She had learned to anticipate. She would find strength within the darkness. Suddenly, a door creaked. Violet tensed, muscles coiled, ready. Footsteps approached, firm, deliberate, confident. A single voice called her name in a voice that sent shivers down her spine. Violet. She froze. The sound of him, Ren, echoed in her mind, impossible yet tangible. Her pulse quickened, hope flaring even as fear tightened its grip. Outside, Ren moved with lethal purpose. The estate had burned behind him, but his mind, always calculating, had already traced the path to her captors. He negotiated with men whose loyalties were measured in blood and fear, men who could kill with a glance. Each word he spoke was precise, each tone weighted with threat and charm. A dangerous combination that bent wills and crushed resistance. Violet listened, straining to hear through walls and doors. The sound of his voice, calm yet undeniably commanding, wrapped around her like a lifeline. Her heart ached for him, even as the terror of her situation pressed in from every angle. She realized that even in his absence, even when separated by steel and shadow, Ren's presence dominated her mind, igniting something dangerous within her. Hours passed. The room seemed to shrink around her, suffocating, yet within that confinement, Violet felt a spark of something new. She was not entirely helpless. She had endured, adapted, and absorbed lessons in instinct and anticipation. Her fingers flexed, her muscles tensed, and a dangerous clarity settled over her mind. She would fight if she had to. She would survive. The door opened abruptly. Violet's heart skipped as a figure entered, silhouette sharp and imposing. Julian. His eyes glinted with malice and triumph, his smile cruel and calculating. He moved closer, hands gesturing as though to mock the futility of her situation. "Well, well," he said, voice smooth, a serpent's hiss in the cold room. "You look ready to make a choice." Violet's mind raced. She remembered the note, the betrayal, the explosions, the chaos, the fire, and every sharp edge of the past weeks. Her survival instincts flared. She pressed herself against the wall, eyes tracking every subtle movement, every flicker of his shadow. She would not be an easy victim. Not again. Julian circled her slowly, predator and tormentor, his words meant to provoke, to intimidate, to break her. Ren thinks he owns you, he murmured, almost casually. But you and I both know how fragile his control really is. And now you're free to choose, me or him. Violet's stomach twisted. The words struck like knives, but beneath the fear, a strange clarity emerged. She had seen Ren's world, felt his obsession, understood the fire he carried. She had also felt her own awakening strength, the darkness inside her, the spark of defiance, the readiness to fight, to survive, to reclaim her agency. Her hands, once trembling, now moved with intent. She flexed her wrists against the bindings, testing, probing, finding weaknesses. Julian leaned closer, sensing her movement, and Violet feigned hesitation, a calculated deception, her mind sharp, strategic. He believed her weak. He underestimated her. She struck with precision, pulling a small shard of metal from the floor, cutting through the ropes that bound her. Julian's eyes widened, surprise flashing, but Violet did not wait. Her movements were swift, fluid, born of fear and training. She kicked, ducked, and forced him back with controlled strength. The predator who had sought to manipulate her now faltered, challenged in ways he did not anticipate. Ren's presence became palpable even from a distance, the tension of his impending arrival, a force that pressed against the walls, against Julian's confidence. Violet felt it, the pull, the tether of his obsession and her own awakening awareness. She had survived explosions, chaos, fire, and now she was ready to face the final test, standing, unflinching, against the man who had betrayed her. Julian snarled, frustration and fury flashing across his features. He lunged forward, but Violet anticipated, dodging, countering, her body alive with purpose, her mind razor-sharp. She was no longer merely a victim. She had become a participant, a fighter, a woman capable of facing the storm head-on. But the final confrontation was interrupted by a sudden low rumble from the far corner of the room. Violet's heart skipped. Julian's eyes flicked, confusion breaking his cruel composure. The sound was subtle, yet unmistakable. The shifts, ting of heavy objects, the subtle hint of another presence, calculated and deliberate. Violet realized with a jolt that she was not alone, that danger, and perhaps rescue, was closer than she imagined. Participant, a force in the storm, alive in ways she had never imagined. Ren's gaze never left hers, dark, smoldering, and intimate. "You're mine," he murmured, possessive, a promise and a warning intertwined. Violet's breath hitched. She wanted to resist, to assert control, but the intensity of the moment, the fire, the danger, made her body betray her. She was drawn to him, to the darkness, to the obsession that both terrified and consumed her. The final confrontation with Julian was swift and merciless. Ren moved like a shadow, each motion lethal, every strike a declaration of power. Violet stayed close, instinctively participating, guiding him subtly, her hands and eyes anticipating the next move. She felt alive in the chaos, her mind sharp, her body tuned to the rhythm of danger and desire that defined their connection. When Julian finally fell, incapacitated and defeated, the room went still. Smoke curled around the corners, the air thick with heat, adrenaline, and the lingering tension of the fight. Violet pressed against Ren, their breaths mingling, hearts hammering in unison. She realized she was drawn to him in ways that terrified and thrilled her. She had survived, yes, but she had also surrendered, at least in part, to the dark pull of his presence. Ren's hands moved to cup her face, eyes dark with intensity. "Do you understand now?" he whispered, voice low and intimate, vibrating with raw emotion. "You are mine, And nothing will ever change that. Not him, not anyone. Violet's lips parted, a shiver coursing through her. She had seen the worst of the underworld, faced betrayal, explosions, and mortal danger, yet in the center of it all, the one constant, the one undeniable force, was Ren. His darkness, his obsession, his ferocity, and his capacity for protecting her had become inseparable from her own heartbeat. She pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath, the heat, the undeniable weight of him. I can't stay away, she admitted, voice trembling, raw, unfiltered, even if I should. Ren's lips brushed her hair, fingers tightening possessively. You never will, he said, a dangerous promise, and you'll learn to embrace it, just as I embrace you. The silence after the fight was thick with unspoken words, with the tension of survival and desire coiled tightly around them. Violet knew that life would never return to what it had been. She had seen the darkness, tasted danger, and felt herself irrevocably bound to him, not just by circumstance, but by choice, by passion, by the magnetic pull of shared obsession. Ren straightened, eyes burning with resolve. The threat of Julian and his allies still loomed, the world beyond the hideout still dangerous, still unforgiving. He turned to Violet, gaze intense, almost consuming. We're not finished, he said, voice low, dangerous. Not by a long shot. I will hunt them down, all of them, every last one. Violet's stomach twisted with both fear and exhilaration. She understood the promise in his words, the war he was declaring, and she realized that she could not stand aside. The darkness he inhabited was now hers to witness, to embrace, to fight alongside. Their reunion had been violent, raw, and intimate. Their connection had deepened in ways she had never anticipated, and yet the battle was far from over. The world outside waited, full of threats, betrayal, and blood, and Violet knew that she would follow him into the fire, into the chaos, into the darkness that was now undeniably a part of her. Ren's dark eyes blazed with obsession and fury as he declared war on Julian and his allies. Violet pressed close, her pulse racing, realizing that her life had changed forever. The war had begun, and the question loomed, was she ready to fight? By his side, to embrace the darkness, to risk everything for him? Violet stood before the mirror in Ren's private training room, her reflection a mixture of determination and fire. The woman staring. Back at her was not the fragile archivist who had once wandered the halls of Chicago's museum, lost in shadows and fear. This was a new Violet, tempered by danger, honed by survival, and burning with a darkness she had once feared. Ren's footsteps were quiet behind her, deliberate, a presence that made the air itself vibrate. You're ready, he said, voice low, intimate, full of approval and obsession. Violet turned, catching the smoldering intensity in his eyes, feeling the pull she could no longer deny. She nodded, heart pounding, pulse alive with anticipation. I'm ready, she whispered, though even she could feel the trepidation under her confidence. The next phase of their campaign began in the shadowed streets and hidden corners of the city. Julian's empire, sprawling and ruthless, had been a fortress of greed and betrayal. Now Violet and Ren moved like shadows, dismantling it piece by piece. She had learned his methods, his rhythm, and the deadly precision that made him a king of this world. Violet's training had sharpened her instincts, teaching her to anticipate danger, to read intentions, and to use her own power to manipulate, seduce, and strike with calculated efficiency. She moved through Julian's contacts, a lethal mix of charm and intimidation, and every step reinforced the bond she shared with Ren, a bond forged in fire, obsession, and survival. Infiltrating the network was not only physical, but psychological. Violet learned to probe, to persuade, to exploit weaknesses, always under Ren's watchful eye. He was ruthless in his teaching, relentless in his oversight, yet his proximity was intoxicating. Every brush of skin, every whisper, every controlled motion was a constant reminder of his claim, his obsession, his need. The missions became more daring, more dangerous. Violet navigated fire escapes, hidden passages, and confrontations that demanded very ounce of her new skills. She felt alive in ways she had never known, exhilarated by the danger and the intimacy of moving in tandem with Ren. They were partners in every sense, a perfect, lethal, obsessive pair. Their romance, already raw and consuming, intensified amidst the chaos. In the quiet moments between missions, the connection between them crackled, thick with unspoken desire and violent tenderness. Ren's hands, always possessive, became instruments of both instruction and seduction. Violet's responses were instinctive, a dangerous interplay of fear, desire, and surrender. One night, amidst the shadows of a deserted rooftop, they paused, bodies pressed together, the city lights below shimmering like a sea of fire. Ren's hands gripped her waist, fingers digging in possessively, yet with a tenderness that left her breathless. "You belong to me," he murmured, voice low, vibrating with obsession. Violet's lips trembled as she whispered back, I'm yours." The words a surrender and a declaration. Their missions were a dance of fire and shadows. Julian's lieutenants fell one by one, blindsided by the precision and ruthlessness of Ren and Violet. She became more than an ally. She became a weapon, a force that both terrified and enthralled. Her mind sharpened, her reflexes honed, and the darkness within her, a darkness she once feared, became a tool, a shield, a sword. Through every mission, every confrontation, their intimacy deepened. Violet felt the pulse of Ren's obsession, the ferocity of his protection, and the intoxicating danger of his desire. She found herself craving the darkness, the fire, the intensity, knowing that survival and passion were intertwined in ways she had never imagined. Julian's empire began to crumble under their calculated assault. Safe houses were exposed, shipments intercepted, alliances shattered. Violet and Ren moved with a fluid, terrifying synchronicity. She could anticipate his moves, his decisions, the rhythm of his lethal precision. Every moment of danger was amplified by the proximity of his presence, the heat of his obsession, the undeniable claim he held over her. The nights were long, filled with whispers of strategy, the click of weapons, and the electric intimacy of shared danger. Violet's body and mind adapted to the rhythm of Ren's world. She had become something more, something stronger, darker, and far more dangerous than she had ever known. During a particularly daring raid on one of Julian's strongholds, Violet took the lead, moving with a fluidity that astonished even Ren. Her hands were precise, her decisions calculated, every step a dance of fire and intent. Ren watched her with pride and hunger, every brush of skin, every shared glance, reinforcing the storm of desire and obsession that bound them. After the raid, they found themselves alone in a safe house, the adrenaline of the mission still thrumming in their veins. Ren pressed her against the wall, hands gripping possessively, eyes dark with hunger and admiration. Their connection was raw, intense, a blend of violence, tenderness, and unyielding passion. Violet responded instinctively, surrendering to the fire, the obsession, the undeniable pull of his presence. The culmination of their campaign against Julian came with a final confrontation. In a dimly lit warehouse, surrounded by shadows and the remnants of the empire they had dismantled, Violet and Ren faced Julian together. Their coordination was flawless, a mixture of violence, strategy, and intimacy. Each movement, each strike, each glance carried layers of meaning: survival, dominance, protection, desire. Julian fell, defeated, humiliated, his empire in ruins. For a fleeting moment, victory seemed absolute. Violet felt the exhilaration, the rush of power, the intoxicating blend of fear, desire, and triumph. She looked at Ren, breathless, pulse racing, realizing how irrevocably their fates had intertwined. But in that moment of triumph, a shadow shifted at the edge of the room. Violet's instincts screamed, something darker, more dangerous, more calculated than Julian had ever been emerged from the corners, silent, watching, waiting. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of dread and anticipation surging through her. Ren's eyes narrowed, his body tensing, and Violet felt the familiar surge of heat and danger. She pressed closer to him, sensing that the battle, the obsession, the fire between them was far from over. The darkness they had conquered was only a prelude to something far more lethal, far more consuming. Just as victory seemed certain, a new, even deadlier rival emerged from the shadows, silent, calculating, and far more dangerous than anyone they had faced before. Violet's heart raced as she realized their fight had only just begun, and the next storm would test them like never before. The warehouse was silent, but the air vibrated with menace. Shadows stretched along the walls like dark fingers, and Violet could feel the weight of unseen eyes. She pressed herself close to Ren, her pulse a rapid drumbeat, every nerve screaming that this final threat was unlike anything they had faced. Ren's hand gripped hers, fingers tight and possessive. "Stay close," he murmured, voice low, intimate but laced with lethal promise. Violet nodded, body tense, mind razor sharp. She had survived explosions, betrayals, assassins, and fire, but this felt different, calculated, patient, deadly. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, lean, masked, moving with lethal grace. Violet's breath caught, heart hammering, as she recognized the aura of power and danger that radiated from the newcomer. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet she stood her ground, aligned with Ren, the storm of their combined strength coiling around them. Ren's eyes narrowed, dark and smoldering, burning with obsession and fury. "You won't touch her," he said, voice low, each word a blade. Violet pressed closer, feeling his heartbeat, a tether in the midst of deadly anticipation. She had learned to fight, to anticipate, to survive, but the intensity of standing beside him in the eye of the storm made her pulse skyrocket. The first strike came suddenly, a blur of motion that forced Violet and Ren into immediate action. Ren moved with precise brutality, intercepting the attack, body a shield, mind a weapon. Violet's instincts kicked in. She ducked, parried, and used her own force to counter the threat. Every motion was fluid, lethal, the culmination of weeks of training, fear, and obsession. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken by the clash of bodies, the metallic ring of weapons, the roar of their combined determination. Violet moved with precision, her mind sharp, every reflex synchronized with Ren's movements. She was no longer the fragile archivist. She was a force, a queen beside a king, a participant in this lethal ballet. Ren's presence was overwhelming, every motion filled with possessive intensity, yet every touch, every glance was intimate, binding them closer even as bullets and blades flew. Violet felt herself drawn into him, the darkness, the obsession, the undeniable intensity of their connection. Fear and desire collided in her chest, a storm she could neither resist nor escape. The masked adversary struck again, calculating, precise, relentless. Violet anticipated, countered, and moved with lethal intent, her confidence surging. Each strike she landed, each maneuver she executed, was a testament to the woman she had become. She was no longer merely protected. She was a partner, a warrior, a queen of shadows. Ren's dark eyes met hers amidst the chaos, and in that glance she felt the full weight of his obsession, his need, his unwavering claim. "Together," he growled, a command and promise rolled into one. Violet responded instinctively, moving in tandem, every motion synchronized, hearts beating as one in the eye of destruction. The fight escalated, each blow, each each maneuver more desperate, more dangerous. Smoke, sparks, and the acrid smell of gunfire filled the space. Violet's mind was focused, razor-sharp, instincts honed by every trial, every betrayal, every brush with death. She had become Ren's equal, in skill, in courage, in ferocity. At a critical moment, Ren and Violet executed a seamless combination of strategy and instinct, disarming the masked threat. Bodies collided, weapons flew, and in a final, explosive motion, the adversary lay defeated, vanquished by their synchronized force. Violet's chest heaved, sweat and adrenaline mingling, and she realized the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. They stood amidst the ruins, the smoke curling around them like ghostly witnesses, eyes locked, breath ragged. Violet's hand found Ren's, gripping tightly, an unspoken promise passing between them. They had survived, conquered, and yet the fire of their bond had only intensified. Ren pulled her close, lips brushing her temple, teeth grazing her neck in a dangerous, intimate gesture. Violet shivered, body responding instinctively to the intensity, the obsession, the raw connection between them. This was not tenderness, it was possession, desire, and protection intertwined in a storm that neither could resist. "You understand now," Ren whispered, voice low, vibrating with dark intensity. "There is no turning back. This world, it's ours. Together." Violet pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath, the heat, the weight of him. She nodded, pulse thrumming, mind clear. She had embraced the darkness, the fire, the obsession that defined Ren. She had become his partner in power, his equal in shadow, a queen forged in fire and blood. Fear and desire, passion and violence had become inseparable from her heartbeat. The city outside would never be the same. Their enemies were crushed, their empire secured, but the intensity of their bond, their obsession, their love forged in fire, was something that could never be ordinary. Violet understood now that the thrill, the danger, the darkness would always be part of their existence. Ren's hands moved to her face, dark eyes locking with hers, consuming. "We are unstoppable together," he murmured. "Every enemy, every threat. Nothing can touch us if we stand like this." Violet's lips curved into a small, fierce smile, eyes glinting with both love and defiance. They moved through the ruined warehouse, bodies close, instinctively synchronized, aware that this was both victory and the beginning of a new reality. Every glance, every brush of skin, every heartbeat was a tether to the passion and danger that would define their lives. Violet had fully embraced her role as his partner, his equal, his queen of shadows, the woman who had once wandered silent museum halls, afraid and fragile, now moved with lethal confidence, fierce intelligence, and unshakable loyalty. She was irrevocably bound to Ren, and she knew it. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the city, painting the skyline in shades of fire and gold. Smoke lingered in the streets, the echoes of battle fading, but the presence of their love, obsession, and power was palpable, undeniable, eternal. Ren pressed a finger to her lips, dark eyes smoldering with promise and possession. "Remember," he whispered, voice low, intimate, a warning and a vow intertwined. "This world is ours, but never look back." Violet swallowed, pulse racing, lips curving in a determined, dangerous smile. She understood completely. There would be no turning back, no innocence, no ordinary life. Only fire, obsession, and the unbreakable bond they had forged together in darkness, passion, and blood. And as she pressed herself against him, feeling the dangerous, intoxicating weight of his claim, she knew that this was not the end. This was a beginning, a life of shadows, power, and love that would burn brighter than any threat, any enemy, any world they would ever face.